I watched in disbelief as my body hit the cold marble floor, my designer dress torn at the seam. The gasps from 200 elite guests echoed through the grand ballroom as I struggled to get up. But what happened next would reveal a truth so shocking that it would change everything I thought I knew about power, revenge, and love. This is my story. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Elena Martinez, and 6 months ago, I was living a completely different life. I worked as a personal assistant at Morrison Tech Industries, one of the most prestigious companies in the city. It wasn't glamorous work managing schedules, booking flights, handling the endless demands of wealthy executives, but it paid well enough to support my younger sister Maria through college. That was all that mattered to me. The job came with its challenges, especially dealing with the entitled children of board members who treated staff like invisible servants. But I had learned to navigate their world with grace and professionalism, always remembering that my dignity wasn't dependent on their approval. I had built a reputation for being reliable, trustworthy, and discreet, qualities that were apparently rare in their circles. Everything changed the day I was assigned to work directly under Victoria Blackwood, the 25-year-old daughter of the company's largest shareholder. Victoria had just returned from studying abroad in Switzerland, and she was determined to prove herself worthy of inheriting her family's business empire. The problem was, Victoria believed proving herself meant crushing anyone she perceived as beneath her. From our first meeting, Victoria made it clear that she considered me nothing more than an obstacle to her success. She would deliberately schedule meetings during my lunch breaks, assign impossible tasks with unrealistic deadlines, and publicly criticize my work in front of other executives. But the worst part wasn't her cruelty, it was how everyone else just stood by and watched, too afraid of her family's influence to intervene. Despite the toxic environment, I persevered because I had goals that were bigger than Victoria's petty power games. I was saving money to open my own consulting firm, and I was only 6 months away from having enough to make that dream a reality. Maria was about to graduate summa cum laude from medical school, and our mother's small restaurant was finally turning a profit after years of struggle. I couldn't afford to let Victoria's behavior derail the life I was building for my family. The turning point came during the annual Morrison Tech Charity Gala, a lavish event that raised millions for various causes while allowing the wealthy elite to showcase their philanthropy. I had been working for weeks to ensure every detail was perfect, from the flower arrangements to the silent auction items. It was my responsibility to make sure Victoria looked good in front of the city's most influential people. The night of the gala, Victoria arrived wearing a stunning emerald gown that cost more than most people's annual salary. She looked absolutely radiant, and for a moment, I actually felt proud of the work we had done together to make the event successful. The ballroom was filled with mayors, celebrities, business moguls, and foreign dignitaries, all there to see and be seen while contributing to worthy causes. I was coordinating with the catering staff when I noticed a commotion near the main entrance. A young man in an expensive suit was arguing quietly with security, showing them some kind of identification. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him from where I stood across the crowded ballroom. Victoria noticed him too, and her expression immediately darkened with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. The mysterious man approached our registration table, and I could see Victoria's hands trembling slightly as she pretended to review her notes. When he finally reached us, his presence seemed to fill the entire space around us. He was tall, confident, with kind eyes and a warm smile that immediately put me at ease. There was something magnetic about him, something that suggested he was used to being the most important person in any room. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth and professional. "I'm James Morrison. I believe I'm on your guest list." My heart nearly stopped. James Morrison, the reclusive billionaire heir who had been traveling the world for the past 5 years, building schools and hospitals in developing countries. He was supposed to be somewhere in Africa, not standing in our ballroom looking directly at Victoria with an expression that could freeze fire. Victoria's face went pale, then flushed red, then pale again. She fumbled through her tablet, clearly trying to buy time while processing the implications of his unexpected appearance. James Morrison wasn't just any billionaire, he was the billionaire, the one whose family name was literally on the building we worked in. His father had passed away 2 years ago, leaving James as the sole heir to an empire worth over $50 billion. Of course, Mr. Morrison, Victoria managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. We're honored to have you here tonight. I'm Victoria Blackwood, and this is my assistant, Elena. The way she introduced me, like I was a piece of furniture, she happened to notice, made my cheeks burn with embarrassment. But James looked directly at me, extended his hand, and said, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Elena. Thank you for all your hard work organizing tonight's event." I was shocked that he knew about my involvement, but I shook his hand professionally and thanked him for coming. His handshake was firm and warm, and when our eyes met, I felt something I had never experienced before, a connection that seemed to transcend the formal business setting. Victoria noticed the interaction and immediately stepped closer to James, effectively blocking me from his view. "Mr. Morrison, let me personally escort you to your table," Victoria said, linking her arm through his without invitation. "I'm sure you'll want to meet some of our other distinguished guests." James politely extracted his arm from her grasp and smiled diplomatically. "That's very kind, but I actually prefer to mingle on my own. Charity events are more meaningful when you get to meet people from all walks of life." Victoria's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the flash of irritation that crossed her face. She had clearly expected to spend the evening attached to James's arm, using his presence to elevate her own social status. Instead, he was politely but firmly establishing boundaries, treating her like any other guest rather than the center of his attention. As the evening progressed, I watched from across the room as Victoria became increasingly frustrated with James's behavior. He spent time talking to everyone, donors, volunteers, even the catering staff, but he kept his interactions with Victoria brief and professional. She tried multiple times to engage him in lengthy conversations, but he always found gracious ways to excuse himself and move on to other guests. What I didn't realize at the time was that James had been watching me too. While I was focused on ensuring the auction ran smoothly and the donors were properly recognized, he was observing how I treated everyone with equal respect and kindness. He later told me that he was impressed by how I remembered the names of servers I had only met once, and how I took time to personally thank each volunteer for their contribution. The crisis began when Victoria decided she needed a dramatic gesture to capture James's attention. She had been drinking champagne steadily throughout the evening, and her usual sharp judgment was becoming clouded by alcohol and desperation. I was near the auction display, double-checking that all the items were properly labeled with their starting bids, when I heard Victoria's voice getting louder and more aggressive. She was cornering James near the silent auction tables, her voice rising above the polite conversation level that dominated the rest of the ballroom. "I think you're being incredibly rude," she was saying, her words slightly slurred. "Do you have any idea who my family is? Who I am? I've been trying to have a civilized conversation with you all evening, and you keep brushing me off like I'm some kind of servant." James remained calm, his voice steady and professional. "Victoria, I appreciate your family's contributions to the company, but tonight is about charity, not business networking. I'm here to support the causes we're raising money for, and I want to spend time with as many supporters as possible." His diplomatic response only seemed to infuriate Victoria more. "Don't patronize me," Victoria snapped, her volume attracting attention from nearby guests. "I know exactly what this is about. You think you're too good for me, don't you? Well, let me remind you of something. My family's money helped build your empire. Without the Blackwood investment, Morrison Tech would be nothing." The nearby conversations had stopped entirely, and I could see people turning to stare at the unfolding drama. James's expression hardened slightly, but his voice remained controlled. "Victoria, you're causing a scene at a charity event. Perhaps you should consider getting some fresh air." It was a gentle suggestion delivered with the authority of someone who was used to being obeyed, but Victoria interpreted it as a public humiliation. That's when she saw me approaching with a tray of auction paddles for late-arriving guests. In her alcohol-fueled rage, Victoria decided that I was somehow responsible for James's rejection. In her twisted logic, if she could demonstrate her power over me in front of James, she could prove her superiority and win his respect. She was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. "You," Victoria said, pointing at me with a perfectly manicured finger. "This is all your fault." I stopped walking, confused by her accusation and unsure how to respond. The guests around us had gone completely silent, sensing that something dramatic was about to happen. James was watching the interaction with growing concern, his earlier politeness replaced by sharp attention. "I'm sorry," I said carefully, setting down the tray of paddles and trying to de-escalate whatever was building in Victoria's mind. "I'm not sure what you mean." Victoria's eyes were blazing with fury, and I could see that rational conversation was no longer possible. She had crossed the line from professional frustration into personal vendetta, and I was about to become the target of her meltdown. "You know exactly what I mean," Victoria hissed, stepping closer to me. "You've been flirting with Mr. Morrison all evening, haven't you? Trying to make me look bad in front of the most important man in the room. Well, let me remind you of something. Elena, you're nobody. You're just an assistant, and assistants don't get to embarrass their superiors in public." The accusation was so ridiculous that I almost laughed, but the venom in Victoria's voice stopped me cold. I could see James moving closer, his expression growing darker by the second. Other guests were pulling out their phones, sensing that they were about to witness something that would be talked about for years to come. "Victoria, I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said as calmly as possible. "I've been focused on making sure the event runs smoothly. I haven't been flirting with anyone." My professional response only seemed to enrage Victoria further, as if my dignity in the face of her accusations was itself an insult to her authority. "Don't lie to me," Victoria screamed, her voice echoing off the ballroom's high ceilings. "I saw how you looked at him. I saw how you shook his hand like you were equals. Well, let me show you exactly what you are." And with that, Victoria raised both hands and pushed me backward with all the force she could muster. I stumbled backward, my heels catching in the hem of my dress as I tried to regain my balance. The world seemed to slow down as I fell, my body hitting the marble floor with a sound that echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom. My dress tore at the seam, the fabric that I had saved for months to afford now ruined beyond repair. Pain shot through my back and shoulders as I landed hard on the unforgiving stone. The gasps from 200 guests filled the air as I lay there, stunned and humiliated, trying to process what had just happened. Victoria stood over me, breathing heavily, her face flushed with triumph and rage. She had just physically assaulted someone in front of the city's most influential people at a charity event because she couldn't handle rejection from a man she barely knew. But then James Morrison stepped forward, and his voice cut through the silence like a blade forged from pure steel. When he spoke, every person in that ballroom understood that they were witnessing the moment when true power reveals itself not through cruelty or violence, but through unwavering moral strength. "Victoria Blackwood," James said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you will apologize to my wife now." The silence that followed James's words was so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. 200 of the most powerful people in the city stood frozen, their champagne glasses suspended halfway to their lips, their conversations abandoned mid-sentence. Victoria's face had gone from flushed red to deathly pale in the span of 3 seconds, and I could see her hands beginning to tremble as the full weight of what James had just said began to sink in. My wife. He had called me his wife. I was still on the marble floor, my torn dress spread around me like broken wings, trying to process the impossible words I had just heard. James Morrison, the billionaire heir whose name was carved into the very building where I worked, had just claimed me as his spouse in front of the entire social elite of our city. It was so surreal, so completely unexpected, that for a moment I wondered if the fall had given me a concussion and I was hallucinating. But then James was kneeling beside me, his strong hands gently helping me to my feet with a tenderness that spoke of genuine care and familiarity. As I stood, still shaky from the fall and the shock of his revelation, he positioned himself protectively between me and Victoria, his body language radiating an authority that made even the most powerful people in the room take an involuntary step backward. I said, "Apologize," James repeated, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that only comes from someone who has never had to raise their voice to be obeyed. "You just physically assaulted my wife at a charity event because you couldn't handle being politely declined for a conversation. I want to hear you say you're sorry, and I want to hear it right now." Victoria's mouth opened and closed several times like a fish gasping for air. The woman who had spent months terrorizing me with her casual cruelty, who had made my work life a daily struggle for survival, was completely paralyzed by the simple reality of facing someone whose power dwarfed her own. Her family's wealth, which she had wielded like a weapon against anyone she considered beneath her, suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the Morrison fortune. I didn't know," Victoria stammered, her voice barely audible above the whispered conversations that had begun rippling through the crowd. "James, surely you can't be serious. She's just an assistant. She works for me. There must be some kind of mistake." Even in her moment of complete defeat, Victoria couldn't resist one last attempt to diminish my worth, to reduce me to nothing more than my job title. James's expression darkened further, and when he spoke again, his words carried the weight of absolute finality. "Elena Martinez is not just an assistant. Victoria, she's not just anything. She is my wife, the woman I love more than my own life, and the person whose kindness and integrity put your behavior to shame every single day. Now apologize to her, or I'll make sure that neither you nor your family ever works in this industry again." The threat hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. Everyone in that ballroom knew that James Morrison had the power to make good on his words. With a single phone call, he could destroy the Blackwood family's business empire, end Victoria's career before it truly began, and ensure that they became social pariahs in every circle that mattered. The Morrison name carried that much weight, that much influence. Victoria looked around the room desperately, searching for an ally, someone who might intervene on her behalf. But the same people who had watched in silent approval as she humiliated me were now backing away from her, unwilling to associate themselves with someone who had just made an enemy of the most powerful man in the building. Fair-weather friends, I realized, were no friends at all when the weather truly turned stormy. "I'm sorry," Victoria whispered, the words so quiet that I had to strain to hear them. But James wasn't satisfied with a whispered apology that could be dismissed or forgotten. He wanted Victoria to understand the full consequence of her actions, to experience the same kind of public humiliation she had just inflicted on me. "Louder," James commanded, his voice echoing off the ballroom's ornate ceiling. "I want everyone in this room to hear you apologize to my wife for your inexcusable behavior. I want them to understand that there are consequences for treating good people with cruelty and disrespect." His demand wasn't just about getting an apology, it was about establishing a new order, making it clear that kindness would be protected and cruelty would be punished. Victoria straightened her shoulders, and for a moment I saw a flash of the defiance that had made her so formidable in business meetings. But then she looked into James's eyes and saw something there that made her realize this was not a battle she could win. With her voice shaking but audible to everyone present, she said, "I apologize, Elena. I'm sorry for pushing you. I'm sorry for my behavior tonight." The words should have felt like a victory, but instead I felt oddly hollow. Victoria's apology wasn't sincere, it was a strategic retreat, a calculation made under duress rather than a genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing. I had learned something important about the nature of power and justice. Sometimes getting an apology isn't the same as getting real accountability. James helped me adjust my torn dress and whispered, "Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" His concern was so genuine, so different from the performative politeness that dominated these social events, that I felt tears beginning to form in my eyes. When was the last time someone had asked about my well-being with such obvious sincerity? "I'm okay," I whispered back, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. My back ached from the fall, my pride was bruised from the public humiliation, and my mind was reeling from the revelation that had just turned my entire world upside down. How could James Morrison be my husband when I had never even had a real conversation with him before tonight? As if reading my thoughts, James took my hand and addressed the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who had given countless speeches to influential audiences. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to your evening. My wife and I have been keeping our marriage private for personal reasons, but the events tonight have made it necessary to reveal the truth. Please continue enjoying the gala and supporting these worthy causes." His explanation was smooth and diplomatic, giving the crowd just enough information to satisfy their curiosity while maintaining an air of mystery that would fuel gossip for months to come. I watched in amazement as 200 people who had been frozen in shock just moments earlier began to resume their conversations, their attention shifting from our drama to speculation about secret marriages and hidden romances. But James wasn't finished. With my hand still in his, he guided me toward the center of the ballroom where a small stage had been set up for the evening's presentations. The crowd parted before us like the Red Sea, everyone eager to clear a path for the man whose family foundation was the primary sponsor of the event. I felt like I was floating through a dream, completely detached from reality. "Elena," James said as we reached the stage, his voice low enough that only I could hear him. "I know this is confusing and overwhelming. I know you have 1,000 questions, and I promise I'll answer every single one of them. But right now, I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" There was something in his eyes, a vulnerability beneath the confidence, that made me believe he was as nervous about this moment as I was. I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady if I tried to speak. James smiled, the first truly relaxed expression I had seen from him all evening, and squeezed my hand gently. Then he stepped up to the microphone that had been set up for the evening's auction announcements, and the entire ballroom fell silent once again. "Good evening, everyone," James began, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the room. "I hope you're all enjoying tonight's gala, and that you'll continue to support the incredible organizations we're raising money for. But I wanted to take a moment to share something personal with all of you, something that I've kept private for too long." The crowd was hanging on his every word, their attention so focused that I could practically feel the collective intake of breath. James looked down at me, standing beside the stage in my torn dress, and his smile became radiant with genuine happiness. "6 months ago, I met the most extraordinary woman I've ever known," James continued, his eyes never leaving mine. "She was working late in her office, staying after hours to help a colleague who was struggling with a project deadline. She didn't know I was watching from the hallway, but I saw her give up her own dinner to make sure someone else could succeed. That's when I knew I had found someone special." My heart was racing as memories began flooding back. 6 months ago, I had indeed stayed late to help Marcus from accounting with a presentation he was struggling to complete. His wife had just given birth to twins, and he was overwhelmed trying to balance work and family responsibilities. I had never mentioned helping him to anyone. It wasn't the kind of thing you bragged about. It was just what decent people did for each other. I started finding excuses to walk by her office, James continued, his voice warm with affection. I learned her coffee order from the break room attendant. I discovered that she donated part of her salary to pay for her sister's medical school tuition. I watched her treat everyone from senior executives to maintenance staff with exactly the same level of respect and kindness, and slowly, carefully, I began courting the woman who would become my wife. The crowd was completely captivated now, their faces reflecting the kind of romantic fascination usually reserved for fairy tales and movies. But I was beginning to remember moments that hadn't seemed significant at the time. The expensive fee that occasionally appeared on my desk with no note attached. The elevator conversations with a man whose face I never quite caught in the dim lighting. The feeling of being watched that I had dismissed as paranoia. We were married 3 weeks ago in a small ceremony with just our families present, James announced, and the ballroom erupted in applause. Elena didn't want the publicity that comes with the Morrison name, and I respected her desire for privacy. But after witnessing her grace under pressure tonight, after seeing how she maintained her dignity even when faced with inexcusable cruelty, I realized that I don't want to hide our love anymore. Victoria, who had been standing frozen near the auction tables, suddenly turned and fled toward the exit, her heels clicking frantically against the marble floor. Several other guests followed her with their eyes, their expressions ranging from pity to satisfaction. The woman who had entered the evening as the daughter of a powerful family was leaving as a social pariah who had publicly humiliated herself in front of the city's elite. James stepped down from the stage and took my hands in both of his expression serious despite the celebratory atmosphere in the room. Elena, I know this isn't how we planned to tell people about us. I know you wanted more time to adjust to being part of this world, but I couldn't stand by and watch someone treat you with such disrespect. You are the most important person in my life, and everyone needs to know that. The pieces were falling into place now, the memories reorganizing themselves into a coherent narrative. The mysterious gifts that had appeared on my desk, the chance encounters in elevators and hallways, the feeling that someone was looking out for me during particularly difficult days at work. It had all been James, carefully orchestrating a courtship so subtle that I hadn't even realized it was happening. The marriage certificate, I whispered, remembering the legal documents that had arrived at my apartment 2 weeks earlier. I had assumed they were some kind of mistake, official papers delivered to the wrong address. I had put them in a drawer, meaning to call the law office when I had time. Those were real? James nodded, his eyes twinkling with gentle amusement. Very real. I know it seems impossible, but sometimes love finds a way to exist even when we're not paying attention. I've been in love with you for months, Elena. I've been waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth, to show you that the marriage certificate represents something real and beautiful and worth protecting. The crowd had begun to disperse, giving us space while continuing to buzz with excitement about the evening's revelations. I could see phones being pulled out, messages being typed, calls being made. By morning, our story would be the talk of every social circle in the city. The secret marriage of James Morrison, the reclusive billionaire who had shocked everyone by choosing love over convenience. I need time to process this, I said honestly, looking around at the opulent ballroom that had been the site of so much drama. This is also overwhelming, so completely different from anything I ever imagined for my life. I wasn't rejecting his revelation, but I needed him to understand that my entire world had just been turned upside down. Take all the time you need, James said gently. I've waited months to tell you how I feel. I can wait a little longer for you to decide how you feel about me. But I want you to know that every word I spoke tonight was true. I love you, Elena. I love your kindness, your strength, your integrity. I love the way you make everyone around you feel valued and respected. As we walked toward the exit together, I caught sight of my reflection in one of the ballroom's ornate mirrors. My dress was torn, my hair was disheveled, and my makeup was smudged from tears and shock. But there was something different in my eyes, something that hadn't been there before the evening began. I looked like a woman who had discovered her own worth, who had learned that she deserved to be protected and cherished rather than bullied and diminished. The months that followed were like living in a dream. James was patient and gentle as I adjusted to the reality of our situation, never pressuring me to embrace a lifestyle I wasn't ready for. He helped me understand that our marriage, while unconventional in its beginning, was based on genuine love and mutual respect. He showed me that true partnership meant lifting each other up, not tearing each other down. Victoria Blackwood disappeared from our social circles entirely, her family's business empire crumbling under the weight of lost contracts and severed relationships. The video of her pushing me and James's subsequent defense had gone viral, making her a cautionary tale about the consequences of unchecked privilege and cruelty. She had become exactly what she had always feared, irrelevant and powerless. But the most important change was in how I saw myself. I learned that kindness isn't weakness, that integrity isn't naivety, and that treating people with respect doesn't make you a pushover. I discovered that true strength comes from standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, even when you're outnumbered, even when you're afraid. James and I built a real marriage based on the foundation of mutual admiration and shared values. We created a life together that honored both his position and my principles. Using our combined resources to support causes that mattered to us both, we proved that love doesn't always follow conventional timelines, and that sometimes the most beautiful relationships grow from the most unexpected circumstances. The night Victoria pushed me down changed everything, but not in the way she intended. Instead of humiliating me, she revealed the strength I didn't know I possessed. Instead of proving her superiority, she demonstrated the poverty of her character. And instead of driving James away from me, she pushed us together in a way that made our bond unbreakable. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives become the catalysts for the best changes. Sometimes cruelty reveals kindness, and sometimes falling down is the first step towards standing taller than we ever thought possible. The push that was meant to destroy me instead set me free. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.